way from San Diego.
The future of Java and you. So, I just asked if anyone had come to my talk last time I visited the Java user group here in San Diego, and a couple of you have, but most of you haven't. If you were at my talk a few years ago when I visited San Diego, a lot has changed. But I'm in the same role I was in when I came to visit you before, which is I'm the chairperson and director of the Java community process. I work with the Java developer community all around the world, speaking at meetups like this, but also at developer conferences, and leading and running the Java community process. I am originally from San Diego, born and raised here. So always happy to come visit the San Diego Java user group, even if it's taking me several years to come back here. Like Paul said, it's just difficult to manage the schedules and travel and all the obligations that I have going on, but I enjoy visiting San Diego and visiting lots of new places and meeting with developers all around the world. I have been working with the Java developer community since I joined Sun Microsystems back in 2000, so going on 2 decades now. And that really is what keeps me in this role, is the developer community, so being able to interact with developers like yourself. So I'm definitely looking forward to the break where we can talk some more, and then I'll continue with the rest of my presentation. I like to do lots of fun outdoor things, and if you don't have a chance to speak with me personally here tonight, you can ask me questions on Twitter or follow me on Twitter and see all the interesting things that I have to say about Java development. And I really have 3 things to talk to you about tonight, but first I'll just start with, and especially since a couple of comments in the introduction were talking about, from an employer perspective, why are all the job employment opportunities asking for Java? Well, because Java is the #1 programming language, continues to be so after 24 years plus, currently grown to having 12 million Java developers around the world. Current focus for the Java platform is on the cloud. I heard in the initial conversations people were talking about the web browser, so that person obviously has been around for a long time. But now the focus of Java and the Java platform is the cloud, and making Java the ideal platform for the cloud and continuing for it to be the #1 programming language, both in terms of number of developers as well as demand from employers using the software and the technology. And the reason for that has been the philosophies that we've kept consistent over time. And that when I looked at some of the trends, and when I look at the TIOB Developer Index, and you see that Java does continue to be month after month the #1 programming language, I believe it comes down to the philosophies that we have always had. I can say that since I've been working with Java since the 1.2 release, that these things have remained consistent, and a lot of them are actually due to the fact that they are required through the way we have the Java community set up. So in other words, that is through the Java community process, who, by the way, knows what the Java community process is. And don't be afraid. Yeah, usually just a few folks know what it is. So basically, the things that we as Java developers take for granted about the technology are ensured through the existence of the Java community process. So it really provides the framework for the compatibility and the interoperability and the entire ecosystem that has grown up around Java. That's enabled through the Java community process and the requirements that it has put into place as we evolve and define Java technology. So that is not only the completeness and the quality of the platform, but also the community interaction and collaboration aspects, the compatibility, and the active ecosystem involvement. That's all enabled by the Java community process. And the Java community process happens to be celebrating 20 years of existence. Essentially, the Java community process is really the formalization of the process that Sun used when it very first started Java, but in terms of really wanting to bring in the developer community feedback to make it a language for developers by developers. And you are going to be celebrating with some items I put together for the Java user groups around the world. It's just that they weren't able to be here when I'm here, but if you come back at a future meeting, I know Paul ordered some materials where you can all have a little gift to celebrate the JCP, and maybe you could even have a quiz of who remembers what the JCP is.
There we go.
At that time. But today I'll tell you what the JCP is. I'll also, I want to share that the community has had a lot of changes over the last few years, but also looking back in history over the last 20 plus years, the community has always had changes coming, different innovations and disruptions in the community, and that's a good thing because we've always been able to adapt and evolve and change, and that continues to be the case today, and that's part of the reason why Java remains so popular is some of the changes that I'm going to tell you about that have gone into place over the last couple of years are ways that we're adapting to the market and to the needs of developers. So I'll start with this first part, which is what is the JCP, and then I'm going to take you through some changes in the Java platform itself and the technology, things that you can look for coming out in the next few years, as well as how we're evolving the JCP overall. And then the last part after the break is how you can get involved, or as I said in the beginning when Paul was giving his remarks, your action items for your community of how you're going to get started. So the JCP is an organization. It's run by myself as the chairperson. I have a small staff that helps me to administer it, and I chair the executive committee. So it's like the board of directors for the Java platform. But the work, the heavy lifting, I guess you could say, of the development of Java is actually done by the community. It's done by the leaders of the projects. We call those spec leads, expert group members, and contributors. So those are all JCP members who do the actual work of developing the platform. So essentially what that means is everything that's in the JavaX namespace has been defined through the JCP organization and ratified by the executive committee before it ever gets put into shipping products or any code that you're using in production that's in the Java namespace. That is defined and overseen by the work of the organization, the Java community process. So how that works and why people do it is really motivated by people who are either looking to advance their careers and keep on top of the changes that are coming next, or want to contribute or be a part of the technology as it's evolved. So in particular, people like Paul or like many of you who are working on Java day to day, maybe you want to see things, get your feedback put into the platform, or maybe you're a consultant, or maybe you're an individual who's looking to get involved in open source projects. You're doing it to advance your career and to be seen as an expert. And then the other side of the coin of where people say they want to participate and get involved is, hey, it's just like being a member of the Java community. It's like being a Java citizen. I get to vote for who can be on the executive committee, and I'm a member, and I get to come to the cool parties that you put on. So really, the reasons why you would get involved are really fall into those two categories as an individual. Obviously, as companies, you want to get involved to have an impact and an influence on Java technology, because virtually every company today is using Java technology in one way or another, and especially if you're making substantial investments for your business, you want to have a way to influence that, and the JCP is where you would do it. So the work that we do is organized into Java specification requests. Most people have heard of JSR, the term of a JSR, probably you have. You may or may not know what that is, but it's essentially the way we organize the work. In the JCP, we organize all the projects as a JSR, and JSRs are led by a project lead with community members who make up their expert group. The Java now, in my short history, you saw as of 2006, developed in open source and with an open source license. So those are all done in open source projects, but they feed up into a JSR. And every JSR has three things. It has a spec. That's why Java is so well documented, because it's a requirement of the JCP that it have a full and complete specification in addition to the code, which is the reference implementation. And finally, the test suite. And that is really what enables us to have compatible implementations of Java that are interoperable. And every JSR, every project goes through a lifecycle with votes by the executive committee before it can be put into any shipping JDK or product that implements Java. And so these three deliverables really work together and provide that foundation. So a spec telling you that you can build an implementation or the code serving as the proof of concept, and then taking that code and running it against the test suite to ensure that it's compatible and that you can call it Java. It can also help to identify any ambiguity in the specification. But independent implementers can then take the specification and build their own code, their own implementation, run it against the TCK, and thereby verify it as compatible. So that's what enables that entire ecosystem of choice that developers enjoy, and we're able to interchangeably move between positions like we talked about in the beginning, who's looking for a new position. It's pretty common to be moving to new companies, using new technologies, and having Java at the core enables you to have that interoperability. And for customers, obviously, it creates choice. So for vendors and companies, they have choices in who they can take their products from, who they can be a customer of, and as well as having that resource of getting developers from all different parts of backgrounds. So it's an international effort. Since I do enjoy travel, this makes it an ideal job for me. So I have the opportunity to encourage developers all over the world to get involved and participate in the community and in Java development. And we do have developers from all over the world. I haven't found any developers yet in Antarctica, but on every other continent, I have interacted with developers, even in tiny places, and this is not even the smallest user group meetup I've been to. So it's good to see all the developers coming together, and also to see the commonality, but also the differences. And that's what's so unique about Java in the way that we have it set up, is that we want feedback from everyone and from different parts of the world. So, and even not just corporations. So when I first started working in this program, it was primarily the corporations. But with a multitude of factors, most importantly, probably the shift to open source software development, we now see a majority of our membership coming from individual developers. So people who are passionate, who have side projects that want to get involved in open source communities and projects, developing and joining the JCP. So now the majority of our membership is not the corporations, but the individual developers. But we do continue to broaden our base of corporate members from not just Java vendors anymore to now companies that are actually using the technologies. So companies like Twitter and open source groups like the Apache Software Foundation and the Eclipse Foundation and Java user groups like the San Diego Java user group. You are now officially a member.
We became a member finally.
Right.
So registered like last month.
Yeah.
We got the paperwork signed off. So you've heard it here first.
You've heard it here first.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing is that not every developer needs to be a member of the JCP, but the thing is that the nice thing to know is that you could become a member of the JCP if you wanted to. So it's not necessarily my goal to have every single person who's here go and say, we have to join the JCP. But obviously you could if you were motivated and you wanted to. And I think really what we found, and I'll talk about this in the last part of my talk, is that participating through a Java user group is really an ideal way to do it, is to get your feedback collectively through a group. So it's nice to see that representation around the world, and then also to grow from beyond just the Java vendors to end user companies, especially the big banks that are focused on performance, where milliseconds are money, and the investment trading, the nonprofit and open source groups, and the Java user groups, as well as individual developers. And some folks often will ask me, so you said you have an executive committee and their function really is to vote on all the technologies before I can start using them and shipping products or projects in development. And this is just a picture from our face-to-face last year before Code One, hosted by Twitter. Twitter's on our EC, so that's at the Twitter headquarters in San Francisco. We get together every other month, and we also have that balanced representation on the executive committee, and that's a result of our members voting and electing the executive committee every year. So right now we're at 25 members, and most of us are there in the picture. That's what it looks like. And the final thing I'll say about the overall, what is the JCP? In the JCP, we believe that we continue to need not only standards, also open source, and not just open source, also standards. We need both of those things working together. And what we found since 2006 is that those two things are complementary. We continue to agree on what to standardize, and then we compete on the implementation. So that's working really well. We have open standards that are easier to implement, and then we also have a greater adoption of the standard with a variety of implementations for you to choose from. I would say the one key thing that I've seen that's different in the standardization efforts since that shift from into open source is that we see less of starting with the spec and the standard and more of starting in the open source projects with the code and then coalescing together on a standard, and then oftentimes developing the code and writing the spec right alongside of it rather than more of a waterfall effect, which I think makes perfect sense. So we continue to have the JCP overseeing the work of the Java platform that is created in open source projects. And for the organization overall, like I told you, we'll focus on new revisions of the Java platform, how to evolve the JCP as an organization, and how we continue to get the participation from the millions of developers that are using Java all over the world. So starting with the versions of the platform, just to put this into practice, so the Java SE platform is overseen by the Java community process, and the open source project or place where that platform is developed in the open source project is OpenJDK. Who's heard of OpenJDK? Okay, so more people have heard of OpenJDK than the JCP, and that also is consistent, but I always like to ask. So OpenJDK is organized in JEPs. Who's heard of JEPs? Java Enhancement Proposals. So that's the way OpenJDK organizes their projects. In the JCP, we organize them as JSRs. So there are many more JEPs than there are JSRs. OpenJDK organizes the work that's done there in JEPs, and there are many JEPs that fall under a JSR. So as JEPs are targeted and ready candidates for release, they will be put into a JSR for the platform and then proposed to the executive committee to ratify those. And once approved, they can be put into the platform release and then delivered to you to start using. But of course, along the way, there's early access builds and opportunities for your feedback. But essentially, that's the way it works. The reference implementation for the Java platform, so the RI, one of those three deliverables out of the spec, the RI and the TCK, is the OpenJDK build. So we're currently on the last major release of Java being Java 12. Who knew that the last release of Java was Java 12? That's the current release. If you go to OpenJDK and want to download the latest release of Java, Java 12 is the last version. And this goes into some of the changes that I told you about in the community. With Java 9 back in 2017, which was only 2 years ago, it's hard to believe, we introduced modularity with Java 9, and along with that, and really enabled by having modularity of the Java platform with Java 9, a faster release cadence. So that means that every 6 months, a new version of Java will be shipping. Rather than every 3 to 4 years having a new version of Java, we'll be having new platform releases of Java every 6 months. So that's a big change for the Java community to adapt to. But that's also going back to what I talked about in the beginning of Java being the #1 programming language, and the Java philosophies of modernization and innovation. That's really the way most technology is being released today, on a more frequent release cadence. And it's a way to continue to attract those younger developers who often will view Java as an older programming language. So we're bringing, and then in actuality, having a release every 6 months enables us to put out new features and new innovations more quickly. Every 6 months, giving developers access to new features to accelerate their application development. Then another change that came right along with that at that time into the Java community, which is new for the Java community, but not a new concept in software release cycles, long-term support releases. So Java has not previously had that concept. We've introduced long-term support releases back, the idea of it back in 2017, but the first long-term support release was is Java 11. So Java 11 is the first long-term support release. So that is out. So we'll have long-term support releases every 3 years. The next long-term support release will be Java 17. So that will be coming out in a couple of years. But what we've seen also is that the community also embraced that concept as well. So when I talked about multiple implementations, that also applies to binary distributions. So that means that you have choices in your distribution. So other vendors besides Oracle, who's offering support with the long-term support release, also offer their long-term support releases. So that at least is nice that we have people going along and offering long-term support for 11 and plan to offer for 17. And then one of the last changes we talked about around that same time is Oracle announced that they would open source their proprietary features as part of the Oracle JDK into OpenJDK. And traditionally there were minor things that were in Oracle's JDK that they did not open source, that they kept as commercial features without putting them into OpenJDK, but that is now complete as of OpenJDK 11. Those features are now open source, so that means they were put into OpenJDK and rolled up into the JSRs that were ratified by the executive committee in the JCP. So that also helped to accelerate new innovations and features going into the platform. The availability of these new features, in particular the ones that a lot of customers have been excited about in the past, but maybe were a little bit wary of using because they weren't sure how long Oracle may support them. Those are now available in open source. Things like Flight Recorder and Mission Control in particular are some features that are now available in OpenJDK. So what I thought I'd do now is just walk you through the last releases, starting with Java 9 and the ones that are to come. Give you a little bit of an idea also about how you can keep up with the new release cadence and getting the new features, which also I think goes along with, we've adapted to open source. Now I think this is really where we're coming along and adapting more to agile software development and continuous delivery. So it's more in that vein versus maybe the traditional way. If you've been using Java and as a developer for a long time, you might be accustomed to thinking of how you would integrate and adapt to new Java platform releases. So as I mentioned with JDK 9, that was released in September 2017, almost 2 years ago. That introduced modularity, but not only that, we were accustomed to thinking of major platform releases as one big feature, and we worked on that big feature until it was ready, and we would delay the release if necessary until that feature was ready. But we also collected many other features along the way. So for instance, Java 9 had 100 new features going into it. From the time Java 8 was released until Java 9 was released, it was almost 4 years and accumulated 100 new features that went into that platform release, including modularity. So quite a long list that would not fit on my slide, and I'm not planning to go through there, but most people think of Java 9 as just about modularity. Like I said, it really did, and it laid the platform for us to be able to have a faster release cadence and really be able to keep up with the expectations of the Java developer community. But it gave us lots of other things as well. So at that time we said we're going to have new releases every 6 months, and the community came together and actually did deliver on that, which people were uncertain of that at the time, whether this was really going to work, and the community has been consistent with this. So in March 2018, JDK 10 was released. It was the first feature release, so that means 6 months later the platform's released. Whatever's ready is what goes in there, so we're not waiting for any special features, whether it's long-term support release or not, bears no difference. The JEPs then are targeted. So as I mentioned, OpenJDK is organized into JEPs, and just as a matter of reference, I like to list, so 100 JEPs into Java 9, only 12 JEPs went into Java 10. The most notable of that one, it was JEP 286, introducing the var keyword. But lots of other things went into it as well, but not quite as many as you might expect. So obviously, once you make that transition past Java 8, which is where I realize most of the community is right now, so it will be a hurdle to get over that, migrating from Java 8, but in between Java releases, once you get past Java 8, it's going to be a more incremental change, and I'll talk about in the last part of my talk how you can adapt and get ready for those incremental changes. But to give you an idea, more along the lines of 10 to 12 new features going into each release. So who's working on Java 8 in production? And is anyone working on anything above Java 8 in production? What about in development? That's pretty typical. So I think, now is the time, since we had JDK 11 came out in September 2018. Lots of folks are starting to think about, now might be the time to start thinking about migrating. Like I said, no difference in terms of technical features and what goes into JDK 11. Again, 6 months later, the release came out. 4 JEPs initially targeted, did have 17 JEPs go into it. Another new thing that we had talked about was rolling in those new features from the commercial Oracle's JDK into OpenJDK. So many of those features actually came in with Java 11. So like, for instance, flight recorder and the ZGC garbage collector, that was put in as an experimental feature. So that's, I guess, one more new thing that I didn't mention early on when we talk about changes. We introduced the concept of preview features into the Java platform. So what that means is those are features that are included with the release, but you need to go in and turn them on if you want to use them, and that's because the community is looking for more feedback on those features. So you can use them, but that's a way for us to try to get more feedback before it's put in as a feature that wouldn't say preview underneath it. So like with Java 12, which was released earlier this year, switch expressions is a preview feature. So Java 12 is the current release of Java that you can get today. If you want to go download the latest release of Java, you can get Java 12, and it will have a preview feature in it, which is switch expressions. So that means you would have to go in and manually turn that feature on, and then you can give feedback on it. So 8 JEPs were part of Java 12. The other trend that we started to see is not only has the faster release cadence really widened our pipeline of new projects that are being worked on, but also increasing some of the contributions from community members. So for instance, we have Shenandoah in Java 12, which is contribution by Red Hat. So it's good to see more contributions coming in from community members. Java 13 is almost ready to be released. It has a smaller feature set, only 5 JEPs in that. Even though it's not at final release yet, it's targeted to be released next month in September. There are early access builds out for this. So what that means is you can go to OpenJDK and download OpenJDK 13. That means that you can't use it in production, but you can test it and run your applications against it and think about what changes you might need to make. So that's one of the ways that developers, once they get past Java 8, can get accustomed to the release cycle, is get in the habit of going and downloading the early access builds, which are put out, new early access builds every 2 weeks. So you can download the latest release and test your applications against it and see what changes you might need to make, and help you to evaluate when you're going to migrate, whether you choose to migrate every 6 months, or like many folks who I've talked to have decided they're going to be migrating only to long-term support releases. So that's a decision that within your organization that you need to make. So while Java 13 isn't released yet, it is planned to be released next month. The executive committee is going to be voting on that early in September. And along with that, in tandem, we've already started working on Java 14. So that's been submitted to the JCP as JSR 389. It will have soon a page just like this on OpenJDK. So this is, one of the questions also I get is if we're not going to have that big project that we're hanging the release on for Java 13, how do we know what's going to be in it? When I download the early access build, you would come to a page like this. So in OpenJDK, every platform has a page. This is basically a screenshot of the page where you can see the schedule, as well as links to bugs, but also the features that are targeted to be part of that. So once a feature is put on this page, it's most likely going to be included in the release. Obviously for 13, it's in ramp down phase and just about ready to be released, so these things will be in it. Switch expressions, still a preview feature, also another preview feature, which is text blocks. And 3 new features, regular features, included with Java 13. So that's one way that you can start to plan.
What's a preview?
Oh, the preview features? So the preview features are features that will be shipped with the release, but that are by default turned off. So you need to go in and turn them on and hopefully give feedback to what you think about the feature. And then once the platform lead feels like they have enough feedback, it'll be in the next release, potentially included, as a regular feature. So that's a new thing that was introduced around the same time of 2017. So with the faster release cadence, some features are maybe identified that they want to collect more feedback than they could get in the 6-month time frame. So that's a new concept within OpenJDK, is introducing preview features. And that's something that we talked about last month at the JVM LS Summit, because I didn't even fully understand, even though I had at the executive committee, I had Brian Getz come in and talk about what is a preview feature, full presentation explaining what it was, and I still didn't quite get that part. Now I got that part. So I'm sure it's well documented somewhere, but just like it is what the JCP is, but that doesn't mean that everybody knows. Just like people in this room are like, I don't know what the JCP is. I don't really know what a JEP is, but yeah, I've heard that term.
But now they do.
Now you do. So now you know. It's one of those things that is nice to know as a foundation, but maybe you're not necessarily going to use it in your day-to-day work, but to get a context in your head of Java, the technology that you use, what is the foundation maybe that you take for granted, or why is it so popular, rather than just, oh, right now everyone wants Java, I don't know why. That's one of the reasons why, because it's not about any one vendor, it's a whole community, and the assurances that are put out there in terms of the promises of compatibility. No other technology really can deliver on that, as well as the technology itself in terms of a solution that's scalable and secure. Once you need that type of solution, there really isn't any other choice out there for those particular use cases. Okay, so that's a free feature. All right, so Java 14, that will be the first release of 2020. But what about beyond that? So beyond that, there isn't a JSR, but there is work going on in OpenJDK in terms of, like I talked about, the pipeline of new projects and new functionality that you could expect coming from Java in the next several years. As I said, the specification, the standards process and the work of Java, it's flipped now, so it doesn't start as a standard, it starts in the open source project. So really what we expect is more developers get involved in OpenJDK than necessarily would be a member of the JCP. And again, the same thing applies. Not everyone needs to be a contributor in OpenJDK, but again, it's open to anyone who wants to be, and you can get more involved if you choose to do so. So essentially in OpenJDK, many of you have heard of OpenJDK, maybe you've been to the website, but it's organized in terms of projects. In addition to organizing the work in JEPs, there are projects where work is developed. As work in those projects coalesces and solutions are agreed on within the community, they are put into JEPs, put forward, proposed as JEPs. Once they make it into a JEP, it will be targeted for a JSR to be put into a platform release. So this is development work that's happening. I've highlighted really some of the major projects that are being worked on right now in OpenJDK. And they really align to what the Java platform group itself is seeing as the priorities for the platform moving forward. Obviously, with security continuing to be the #1 priority. But in terms of looking at new features and priorities for how we will do that, these are the investments and the focus of the platform moving forward. And I mapped them to what projects are being worked in terms of where we see the investments that should be put into the platform. And that's from people at Oracle and the project team, as well as community members participating in OpenJDK. So starting with Project Valhalla, that one is focused on creating value types for Java and the object data layout. So making a little bit more flexible. This is something that has not produced any JEPs yet. It's in early stages, but there is a separate early access build out for Project Valhalla. So that's available now. It was just released in July, an early access build if you want to see some of the solutions that they're looking at for creating that. That's Project Valhalla. So I should say again, just thinking about this for how you want to participate. If you wanted to get involved, each one of these projects that I'm going to talk about has their own mailing list and discussion forum, as well as some of them have early access builds, so you can go and join those. Join the mailing list without even being a member or a contributor. Second one is Project Valhalla. So this is focused on making Java the ideal choice in a world of containers. Java obviously already has characteristics that make it ideal for container deployment, but we want to continue to ensure that Java remains the first choice for deployments in the cloud, and being a compatible first choice with containers is important to ensure that. Project ZGC, this is set to be delivered in the current release. So this was open sourced earlier this year. I think it was actually late 2017. So that's Project ZGC, a scalable low latency garbage collector. That was previously part of the Oracle JDK. And Project Panama. Project Panama is focused on the machine learning, AI, big data space. Looking at a replacement for JNI and how to make Java run a little bit better in a native environment. So there is a JSR right now. It's a standalone JSR focused on visual recognition or the visual aspects of machine learning. But this Project Panama is really looking at changes more on the language level that can make Java an ideal platform for these types of use cases, because I think typically when I've gone to talks about machine learning, many of the developers use Python as the first tool of choice, but Java obviously has a lot of advantages in this space. So I think that may be something that you would see changing over the coming years based on the work coming out of Project Panama. And Project Loom. So Project Loom is really an update to the concurrency model. That was something, I guess if you've been around for a while, you would have been involved with the last update to the concurrency model. So in the Project Loom, what their idea is that they would be able to take millions of fibers and spawn them into a single JVM instance. So that's hence the name Project Loom. So that's an interesting project that a lot of folks in the community are starting to follow. So JEPs will come out of each of those projects. Project Amber is language improvements. So smaller language improvements would come out of Project Amber, or we put into Project Amber as they come about. Switch expressions is one of those coming out of Project Amber, so that's one of the ones that's available now in the 12 release. If you download that, you can start using that now. Just remember to turn it on and give feedback to the Project Amber team. And so any of those projects, like I said, you can join. So if they appeal to you, whether that be there's something that you use day to day in your job, or maybe it's a space that you want to learn more about or get into, what you do is go to OpenJDK And join the mailing list, I would say, is the best place to start. That means you would be able to contribute to those discussions, follow those discussions. You can subscribe to get summaries or get every message in your inbox, or you can just read them online. But also download any of the early access builds that are available. So not every project will have an early access build. Panama and Valhalla specifically do have their own separate early access builds that you can download. But every preview release, every early access release you can get from jdk.java.net. So the early access release that's available now is 13. Actually 12 is the one that's ready for use. I need to update that. And you can also get the reference implementations for previous versions of Java at jdk.java.net, and that's a subset of OpenJDK. But downloading the early access builds is really a way to keep up to date. And following the discussions is also a good way to learn about some of the new features and functionality. If there wasn't anything in particular that you wanted to deep dive into, I would recommend just following OpenJDK on Twitter. So oftentimes they'll put out their new JEPs that are introduced, or when a new early access build is available for download. If you are interested in becoming a contributor, there's also the link where you can do that to get started at openjdk.java.net. Many folks, since we introduced this faster release cadence, question, when we're going to update the Java certifications, because up until a couple months ago, the last certification was for Java 8. Java 11 is now available, so if you are interested in certification for Java from Oracle University, there is a 25% off discount running right now for Java user groups. So that's why I put this slide in here. First, to let you know, yes, there will continue to be updated Java training and certifications if you want one. There is a Java user group promotion going on right now. Okay, so that's the first part of my talk, which is Java platform updates. We can take a, now we're going to take a break, or you want to keep going?
No,
I'm
now's a
perfect
good
time.
time for
Okay.
5, let's come back.